this is intended, when we're talking about the humanitarian use of blockchain, of course, the what would you do if is intended to be provocative on all fronts. What would you do if you didn't have your digital identity? You came in through this country, you have passports, you have some mode of an identity card, so that's one issue. What happens when you don't have it? What are the implications? So I'm going to take you along a journey. The other issue is looking at a global force that we can use. What can we do with blockchain in terms of credentialing, which is a really low-hanging fruit opportunity for us when we're looking at this humanitarian use of its technology. I will argue that it should always be humanitarian. It should always be humanitarian. We should always embed ethics and social good in whatever we do. And the third form is I'm going to take you along a higher journey. I'm going to ask you now to think about selective disclosure of your digital identities. This is along the lines of Sir Timothy Berners-Lee, where he's looking at the whole issue of how you selectively disclose your identity sets. It was a big issue at the Web Summit. This gets along to ethics. And then I'm going to challenge you even further to think about issues that I think of, what keeps me up at night, like digital lockboxes, persistent identity, and some homework. We're going to all have some research, so let's go along the journey. Background, a little bit of background, is that in our society today, we do have, you can quote the numbers, around 68 million people who are displaced. It could happen to you or I, for whatever reason. It just could happen. And 25 million people have fled their countries, and they are designated as so-called refugees. Now, the whole issue here is these people, and I've had a chance to be in Jordan, and I've had a chance to meet some of the refugees on a UNHCR mission, is that they really want to work at some portion of time. And they look at what they miss taking away from them, with them, a certificate, a diploma, something that says, I am certified to do X, Y, and Z. Very, very major issues. And I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about a little bit about this whole notion of credentialing. The other thing is, if you don't have an ID, if you don't have a passport, if you're not in the system, something bad happens automatically. It was also a dinner topic I had with some friends from Athens. Human trafficking. Human trafficking is the second most lucrative business next to drug trafficking. And so what happens is this is taken away from you. People cross over, whether they cross over from whatever country, they could pay 2,000 euros, 3,000 euros, whatever it is. Their identity, their passports are taken away. And if you're a young girl, you're out in the street not too far from here. Full stop. In any big city, that happens. The other thing is, when you're not in the system, you have no mode of proving that you have access to any of these wonderful goods and services that we all have a right to. And so I will argue that human trafficking is absolutely huge when you're not in the system. And let me also argue, these pieces of paper can be taken away from you anytime. They are. And so we have to look at the other thing that if you have attended ID 2020 in May of 2016, how many of you did attend that? In New York, there was ID 2020 in the United Nations, and there was a story of Mina Hasina. Lucy Liu actually did that. She's an actress from Canada, actually did the documentary. And this is about a girl who was 8 years old in India, sold to a brothel by her uncle. And she, in the course of those, 12 years or so, had 3 children, but she couldn't prove who the father was. And she knew what the destiny of those children would be. She had no identity. She had no proof. Ultimately, an NGO actually rescued her out and her 3 kids. But these are just examples of what could happen. So mobile phone, so I'm going to take you along an even more interesting journey because you're going to see some commonality in tools. Mobile phones, in whatever form or fashion, and in its simplicity, are very, very important tools. Not only for refugees, but also if you look at what, the Rohingyas, who are quote-unquote stateless, and hate to be called stateless, by the way. These are extensions of their body. In fact, there has been some academic studies around the use of the mobile phone coming out of Germany, particular to the Syrian refugees, who basically said they are my extension of my body, and I use them very, very much to look at GPS, to look at to absolutely learn languages, etc. So the mobile phone becomes, if you will, in our narrative, a very, very important tool for these people, for all of us at the end of the day. The identity market, ladies and gentlemen, is very crowded. And that is meant to be an eye chart, because it is crowded. When we look at the identity market today, this was taken as a snapshot of 2018 in January. It's growing and growing and growing. And what could be the implications here is that something is happening where we can actually look at, we know, well, this is a conclusion, we know identity is very, very important. We know it as a basis of whatever it is we do, but it is looking at where could we find the most important differentiator across the way. And this gets into the whole notion of digital, what is meant by digital identity in itself. And I pause for the moment on digital because on my board is a person who is a refugee. It didn't matter that he had copies of his documentation on a Google Drive. It just simply wasn't going to be accepted by the authorities. He didn't have the originals. He didn't have the originals. And so this gets into some very, very major challenges for us when we're looking at digital identity, what it means to have digital in its format, what it means for you to be in control. That leads us into control. Now I'm going to take you up another path. So here's the path. One is what happens when you don't have digital identity. The other path is selective disclosure. So what we're finding now, if you look at the industry, this gets into ethics. If it's free, you're a product. How do you know you're in control? Is it too late to be, quote, in control? Can I control who I am? Can I selectively disclose what I do? And so you have some people in the industry looking at that very, very closely. Again, if you look at Berners-Lee's project, SOLID at MIT, it's a step forward. In fact, there was a whole manifesto about disclosure, selective disclosure, and how you manage it. The concern we have is that once you have a footprint of yourself here, this goes again around how you're profiled, how you're in control, how you have a digital format of yourself, is that you don't know how your data is being used. You don't know what's being said about you, and you have no level of selectively disclosing. And this becomes a high concern for quite a bit of people. This goes into the ethics that you're going to be talking about at the end of the day. So digital identity, ladies and gentlemen, is very foundational. It's foundational to anything we do, anything we talk about. Anything we talk about in the blockchain credentialing space, anything we talk about in the space of goods and services and access. I mean, if we look at official records and registration, we look at transparent public transactions, selective disclosure, which I just talked about, very, very important. Self-sovereign identity, another very key, and I'm not talking about world citizenship. I'm talking about some other level. A question that we must ask ourselves is whether or not the institutions we know and love, are they still valid? Are there some weaknesses in these institutions that we need to challenge ourselves with? Perhaps there are. And so healthcare. And I'll tell you a story. 48 hours ago, because I like to make it all personal, I had a conference call, a conference call with some people from Somaliland. Now, how many of you have heard of Somaliland? The thing of it is, it's not an official recognized country, but these are people who are cashless, it's cashless, very interested in using blockchain, for example, in land entitlement, for example, land rights, looking at credentialing once again when we're talking about certification and education. So again, we're looking at countries and organizations that are absolutely ready from a humanitarian perspective, not only from a humanitarian perspective, but from a social good perspective to use these sets of technologies. So yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, the identity is absolutely core, and it's the cornerstone of what we need to be thinking about when we're talking about the so-called displaced humans and also being able to manage our own identity sets, as I've stated before. The technology certainly is already here. We know that. That's why we're all here. In fact, we have seen some of the solutions come to play, and we're looking at the journey along the way and what it means to think about how to use these sets of technologies, especially blockchain, moving forward for credentialing. This is an example of a solution. Then I was part of a team from MIT, Solve 2018. We were recognized in the healthcare as one of the winners, Solve winners of 7, on credentialing and solution, looking at the caregiver problem. There's a shortage of caregivers globally. And so we worked together along with the Caregiver for Nurses group and several other organizations to provide the solution. And we are looking at absolutely implementing the solution in Jordan. So here we would think about, for example, caregivers. There is a shortage globally, and what we would be doing is working not only with refugees, but also with Jordanian citizens, looking at, for example, if they don't have proof of something, or proof of X or proof of Y, there would be some type of certification exam to actually look at whether or not or assess whether or not they have a caregiver background. And then, of course, providing a certificate for them to go into, blockchain. If you talk with the refugees, they don't care about this. What they care about is working. What they care about is that their certification will be accepted by a country, if we're talking about legally resettlement, that it will be received and they have the right to work. That's what they care about. If you give them a certificate, there's a fairly high, interesting professional people, they want that country to recognize them. And the reason why this is important is because it costs 40,000, 50,000 euros on an average for people to recertify once they're in a country. And what does that mean? They drain the social system. What does that mean? The implication? They absolutely play into this whole area about look at these people coming in, taking the jobs, and draining the system. So it's an important, interesting problem to look at solving long term. What keeps me up at night, and this is going to get us to a little bit of homework, I like to see us look at digital identity that is persistent to you, that you carry, and that is stored by you. It is not stored in a cloud. That's a hard problem. We're working with some universities to look at that problem, because that's important when I talk about how you carry what it is you carry. We know that a mobile phone will be one of the tools. We could have digital keys extended to other that are carried by our, we share with our family members, that could go onto other devices. But that is an interesting problem. And I think that would be something that we have an opportunity as an industry, as academics, as people who are looking at something that's practical to work on. Again, what does it mean to have a digital apostille? Think about that. I wanted you to think about what a digital apostille looks like. Some areas for research is persistence, digital over paper, credentialing, certification for immutability, we know that, real-time, close to real-time apostille, creation of a digital safe box close to your family members, this polarity between security and privacy at the end of the day. This is my name and I'm in the center, and you should be in the center also. Think about that. Here are your references, and let's do it. Thank you.